The gymnasium on the second floor of the Intercontinental Hotel in Geneva is normally used for corporate fitness programs and early morning yoga sessions. On the afternoon of March 14th, it was cleared for a different purpose. Not for exercise, not for wellness classes, not for any activity that would appear on the hotel's public event calendar. It was cleared for what diplomatic protocol officers call rehearsal staging. The process of preparing for high-stakes summit interactions by practicing every physical gesture, every camera angle, every handshake, every staged moment of choreographed diplomacy that will later be broadcast to 140 million viewers. The President of the United States was scheduled to attend the G7 Economic Summit beginning 41 hours later. 7 heads of state, 19 scheduled bilateral meetings, 4 group photo sessions, 1 formal dinner, and dozens of handshakes, each one captured by cameras, each one analyzed by body language experts, each one interpreted as a signal of alliance or distance or dominance or deference. In modern diplomacy, the handshake is not a greeting. It is a statement. And statements require practice. The rehearsal was scheduled for 90 minutes. Present were the president, 2 Secret Service agents, the White House chief of protocol, 1 senior advisor, and a video operator recording the session on a handheld camera for internal review. The purpose was to walk through each scheduled greeting, calibrate the appropriate grip strength, determine optimal positioning for camera angles, and ensure that no physical interaction could be misinterpreted as weakness. The footage from that rehearsal was never meant to be seen outside that room. It was recorded on an encrypted device. It was labeled for internal use only. It was to be reviewed once, then deleted within 24 hours per standard security protocol. Instead, 11 days after the summit concluded, a 4-minute and 22-second edited compilation of the rehearsal footage appeared on a file-sharing server hosted in Iceland. Within 6 hours, it had been downloaded 340,000 times. Within 12 hours, it was on every major news network. Within 18 hours, it had been viewed 47 million times. The footage shows 6 separate rehearsal sequences. In each sequence, the president extends his hand toward a stand-in representing a foreign leader. In each sequence, the stand-in, following instructions from the chief of protocol, refuses the handshake. Not subtly, not diplomatically, explicitly. The stand-in steps back, crosses their arms, or turns away. And in each sequence, the president is left standing with his hand extended, unsure how to recover, visibly struggling to process the rejection. The first sequence shows the rehearsal for the greeting with the Prime Minister of Canada. The stand-in is a junior protocol officer, a woman in her early 30s, wearing a dark suit. The chief of protocol explains the scenario. Prime Minister Carney has indicated through back channels that he will not engage in a handshake unless the United States lifts the softwood tariff prior to arrival. He is committed to attending the summit, but he has not committed to standard diplomatic courtesies. The president extends his hand. The stand-in steps back and folds her arms. The president keeps his hand extended for approximately 3 seconds, then lowers it. He says, "So what do I do?" The chief of protocol responds, "You acknowledge him verbally, you nod, and you move to the next greeting." The cameras will interpret it as mutual restraint rather than rejection if you control the transition. The president practices the sequence again. Again, the stand-in steps back. Again, his hand remains in the air. This time he lowers it faster, but his expression shows confusion, not control. The chief of protocol says, "Again, faster recovery." They run it a 3rd time. The result is the same. The second sequence shows the rehearsal for the greeting with the President of France. The chief of protocol explains, President Macron has not explicitly refused a handshake, but his team has requested that all greetings be brief and without extended physical contact. They have cited scheduling pressures, but the subtext is clear. He does not want a photo of sustained engagement. The stand-in, a different protocol officer, extends his hand but withdraws it immediately after a single brief contact. The grip lasts less than 1 second. The president attempts to hold the grip longer, but the stand-in has already pulled away. The president says, "That looks weak." The chief of protocol responds, "It looks reciprocal. If you attempt to hold longer than he offers, it will be interpreted as desperation." They run the sequence again. The president shortens his grip to match. The stand-in nods and steps away. The president turns to the chief of protocol and says, "I'm the president of the United States. I don't do brief handshakes." The chief of protocol does not respond immediately. Then he says, "Sir, in this room, we practice what will happen, not what we wish would happen." The 3rd sequence shows the rehearsal for the greeting with the Chancellor of Germany. The chief of protocol explains, Chancellor Scholz has requested that greetings be conducted at a distance of no less than 3 feet. His office cited health protocols, but this is the same distance requested for greetings with the Russian foreign minister last year. The message is equivalence. The stand-in stands 3 feet away. The president extends his hand. The stand-in does not move forward. The president steps forward to close the distance. The chief of protocol interrupts. "Sir, if you step forward, the cameras will show you closing distance. He explicitly requested remain open." That reads as aggression, not leadership. The president steps back. He extends his hand again, but now he is too far away for a handshake to be physically possible. His arm is simply extended into empty space. He lowers it and says, "This is ridiculous." The chief of protocol says, "Sir, this is the reality we are working with." The fourth sequence shows the rehearsal for the greeting with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The chief of protocol explains, "Prime Minister Thornton has not refused a handshake, but her team has indicated she will not initiate one. If you extend, she will reciprocate. If you do not, she will proceed directly to her seat. She is leaving the choice to you." The president says, "So I have to initiate." The chief of protocol says, "Correct. But if you initiate and she reciprocates with minimal engagement, the optics favor her. She controls the duration. You control only whether it happens." They run the sequence. The president extends his hand. The stand-in takes it, holds for exactly 2 seconds, releases, and turns away. The president says, "That's fine. That works." The chief of protocol says, "Sir, that worked because she chose to make it work. If she chooses differently on the day, it will not work, and there is nothing you can do to change that in the moment." The fifth sequence shows the rehearsal for the greeting with the Prime Minister of Japan. The chief of protocol explains, "Prime Minister Ishiba has requested a bow in place of a handshake." This is not unusual for Japanese protocol, but his team specifically requested no handshake even after the bow. The bow is the entirety of the greeting. The president says, "I don't bow." The chief of protocol says, "Sir, if you do not bow, there will be no greeting." He will proceed to his seat, and the cameras will show that you refused a culturally appropriate gesture. That image will play in Japanese media for a week. The president pauses. Then he says, "Show me the bow." The stand-in demonstrates a shallow bow, approximately 15 degrees, hands at sides. The president attempts to replicate it. The angle is awkward. His posture is stiff. He straightens and says, "That looks weak." The chief of protocol says, "It looks respectful." Weakness is refusing and being ignored. This is the alternative. They run it twice more. The president's bow improves slightly, but his discomfort is visible in every frame. When the sequence ends, he says nothing. He simply moves to the next mark on the floor. The sixth sequence shows the rehearsal for the greeting with the Prime Minister of Italy. The chief of protocol explains, "Prime Minister Maloney has indicated she will offer a handshake, but her team has specified it will be brief, and she will not engage in any extended conversation at the greeting. She will shake, nod, and move to her position." The Italian delegation is treating this summit as a procedural obligation, not an opportunity for alliance signaling. The stand-in extends her hand. The president takes it. She releases after 2 seconds and turns away without speaking. The president says, "So she shows up just to show up." The chief of protocol says, "Essentially, yes. Her presence is the minimum required to avoid a diplomatic incident. Her engagement is the minimum required to avoid disrespect. Everything else is withheld." The president stares at the spot where the stand-in was standing. Then he says, "How did we get here?" No one in the room answers. The rehearsal footage ends there. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. 6 greetings. 6 refusals or minimizations. 6 moments of a president practicing how to handle rejection from allies who 18 months earlier would have competed for the longest handshake, the warmest smile, the best photo opportunity. The leak was not an accident. The file metadata showed it was copied from the encrypted device to an external drive 9 minutes after the rehearsal concluded. The external drive was connected to a network 3 hours later, and the file was uploaded to the Icelandic server within 20 minutes of that connection. The individual responsible has not been identified publicly, but the leak was deliberate, surgical, and timed for maximum impact. It was released 2 days before the president was scheduled to attend a campaign fundraiser in Pennsylvania, and 4 days before a key procedural vote in the House on Trade legislation. The immediate political damage was measurable. Polling conducted 48 hours after the leak showed a 16-point increase in voters who believed the president had lost the respect of international allies. Among voters over 50, the figure was 23 points. Among college-educated suburban voters, it was 29 points. The footage did not show policy failure. It showed personal humiliation. And personal humiliation, delivered visually, is far more politically corrosive than policy failure delivered as statistics. Richard Pina is a 31-year diplomatic historian who teaches at Georgetown University and consults occasionally for the State Department on protocol and alliance dynamics. He has written extensively on the role of symbolic gestures in international relations. 2 days after the footage leaked, he was asked by a Senate Foreign Relations staffer to provide a written assessment of the damage. His assessment was 3 pages long. The conclusion was one sentence: "A leader who must practice being rejected has already been rejected." The rehearsal was not preparation. It was confirmation. That sentence was shared internally among congressional offices. Within 72 hours, it appeared in 5 separate op-eds, attributed to an anonymous diplomatic analyst. The phrasing was too precise to be coincidental. Someone inside the Senate Foreign Relations Committee wanted that sentence in public circulation, and it worked. By the end of the week, variations of the phrase had appeared in 14 different news articles, 6 television segments, and countless social media posts. The actual summit, which took place as scheduled 41 hours after the rehearsal, played out almost exactly as the practice footage predicted. Prime Minister Carney did not offer a handshake. President Macron offered a brief, minimal grip. Chancellor Schultz maintained 3 feet of distance. Prime Minister Thornton reciprocated a handshake but controlled the duration. Prime Minister Ishiba bowed and did not extend his hand. Prime Minister Maloney shook hands briefly and turned away without conversation. The only variance from the rehearsal was that the actual rejections were softer, more diplomatically obscured, and therefore more publicly defensible. But anyone who had seen the rehearsal footage knew exactly what they were watching. The choreography had been practiced. The rejections had been anticipated. And the president had been prepared for all of it, which somehow made it worse. He knew it was coming, and he attended anyway, and the cameras captured every moment. The German newspaper Der Spiegel ran a cover story 3 days after the summit with a single image, a photo of the president standing alone at the edge of the group during the formal photo session. The headline was one word in German, isoliert. Isolated. The image showed 7 leaders standing in a loose semicircle engaged in conversation. The president stood 4 feet to the left, not part of the semicircle, looking at his phone. The photo was not staged. It was not manipulated. It was simply a moment when the choreography broke down and the reality became visible. Inside the White House, the response to the leaked footage was not denial. It was silence. No statement was issued. No investigation was announced. No explanation was offered. The silence was interpreted by staff as an acknowledgement that the footage was real, that the rehearsal had occurred, and that the content could not be defended or reframed. You cannot claim the footage is fake when everyone in the room knows it is real. You cannot claim it is out of context when the context makes it worse. By the second week after the leak, the focus had shifted from the footage itself to the question of why the rehearsal was necessary in the first place. If 6 allied nations had communicated through back channels that they would not engage in standard diplomatic greetings, what had happened in the preceding months to create that circumstance? The answer was visible in the timeline: the softwood tariffs, the steel tariffs, the collapsed Ottawa negotiation, the electricity suspensions, the pharmaceutical supply disruptions, the rare earth export delays, the public insults, the ultimatums, the escalations. Each action had seemed isolated at the time it occurred. Viewed together, they formed a pattern. And the pattern was not strength. It was alienation. Allies had not rejected the president because they were weak. They had rejected him because they had concluded that alignment with the United States under the current leadership carried more cost than benefit. That conclusion, once reached collectively, is nearly impossible to reverse. Winston Churchill, in a memorandum written in 1943 and declassified in 1978, reflected on the dynamics of coalition leadership during wartime. He wrote, "The allegiance of allies is not purchased with strength. It is earned with trust. Strength without trust produces compliance in the short term and defection in the long term. We are now in the long term. The United States is now in the long term." The rehearsal footage was not the cause of the defection. It was the documentation of defection that had already occurred. 6 countries had decided, independently and then collectively, that the cost of public association with the American president exceeded the benefit. The handshakes were not refused out of spite. They were refused because offering them would signal alignment that no longer existed. The summit concluded with a joint communiqué. The communiqué was 4 pages long. It contained 17 paragraphs of carefully negotiated language about trade policy, climate commitments, and defense coordination. The United States was mentioned in 3 paragraphs. Canada was mentioned in 4. The European Union was mentioned in 7. The distribution of references was not accidental. It was a precise signal of whose priorities were driving the agenda. At the closing press conference, the president was asked by a reporter whether he was concerned that several allied leaders had declined to engage in traditional diplomatic greetings. The president responded, "I don't care about handshakes. I care about results." The reporter followed up, asking what results had been achieved. The president did not answer. He pointed to a different reporter. That exchange was clipped and shared 8 million times within 24 hours. Not because of what was said, but because of what was not said. The question was direct. The response was evasion. And the evasion confirmed what the rehearsal footage had already shown. There were no results. There was only damage control. The footage remains online. It has been archived, mirrored, and re-uploaded to dozens of servers. Efforts to remove it have failed. It is now part of the permanent record. Future historians studying this period will not need to rely on memoir accounts or diplomatic cables to understand what happened. They will simply watch six stand-ins step away from extended hands, and they will see a superpower practicing how to be refused. The president arrived at the summit believing that presence alone would command respect. He left understanding that presence without alliance is just attendance. And attendance, when surrounded by refusal, is not leadership, it is endurance. The handshakes that were refused in rehearsal were refused again in reality. The only difference was that in rehearsal, the rejections could be practiced privately. In reality, they were broadcast to the world. And the world watched. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe my channel for daily updates.